Right then, before I tell you about the absolute blockbuster signing that could transform Newcastle's midfield forever, we've got two other massive stories that you need to hear first. Trust me, you're going to want to stick around for story number 3, because it involves a player who's just won Serie A, scored one of the greatest goals ever seen at Hampden Park, and the bookies reckon Newcastle are favourites to bring him home. But we'll get to that beauty in a minute. First up, we've got a winger who's flirting with the idea of swapping England for Scotland just in time for the World Cup. And after that, we'll dive into the Florian Thauvin saga. Remember him? The lad who showed up to matches in a tuxedo and got absolutely slaughtered by Alan Shearer on Match of the Day. Spoiler alert, he's finally admitted it was all a massive mistake. But that third story, that's the one that's going to have you buzzing. So let's crack on. Story 1. Harvey Barnes and the Scotland situation. Alright, story number 1. Harvey Barnes, Newcastle's 38 million quid man, has just opened a rather interesting door and it's pointing straight towards Scotland. Now here's the situation. Scotland have just qualified for the World Cup for the first time since 1998. Absolute scenes up at Hampden Park when they beat Denmark 4-2 in a thriller. The whole country's gone mental, and understandably so. They've been waiting nearly 3 decades for this moment. But here's where it gets interesting for Newcastle fans. Harvey Barnes, who's been doing well for us on the left wing, is eligible to play for Scotland through his grandparents. He's only got 1 cap for England, that was back in 2020 against Wales, and according to FIFA rules, if you've played fewer than 3 senior competitive matches for your country, you can switch allegiance. So when Sky Sports asked him about it, Barnes didn't exactly slam the door shut, did he? He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that it's not something he's been thinking about recently, but he's not closing it off either. He watched Scotland's win and said everyone up there must be buzzing, which they absolutely are. Now, Steve Clarke, the Scottish manager, actually spoke to Barnes about this when he was still at Leicester City. Clarke knows the led's quality, and let's be honest, having a Premier League player of Barnes' calibre would be a massive boost for Scotland heading into the World Cup. The 27-year-old was pretty diplomatic about the whole thing. He admitted there's been talk about it before, bits and bubs as he put it, but recently it hasn't really come up. No real chats, no progression. But, and this is the key bit, he's not ruling it out. Can you imagine the reaction from the Scottish lads who actually got him to the World Cup if Barnes just rocks up for the finals? They've been sweating blood for years trying to qualify, and then someone who's been playing for England could potentially waltz in at the last minute. That would be a proper controversial move, wouldn't it? Clarke's trying to use this qualification to inspire the next generation of Scottish talent. He's pointing out that it's actually harder to qualify for the World Cup now than it used to be. Back in 1998, when Scotland last went to the finals, there were 15 European teams in a 32-team tournament, nearly 50%. Now it's 16 teams out of 48, which is only about a third. So even though the tournament's gotten bigger, the qualification is tougher. For Newcastle, this doesn't really change much. Barnes is our player either way, and honestly, having him involved in a World Cup, whether it's for England or Scotland, would be brilliant for his development and fitness. Plus, imagine the banter in the dressing room if he does switch. The Scottish lads would be over the moon, and the English lads would be giving him absolute stick. The ball's in Barnes' court now. Does he stick with England and hope Gareth Southgate's replacement gives him another chance, or does he take up Scotland on their interest and guarantee himself World Cup football? It's a proper dilemma, that one.
Right, story number 2 takes us back to 2015 and what has to be one of the most bizarre transfers in Newcastle's recent history. Florian Thauvin, remember him? Has finally come out and admitted that joining Newcastle was a massive mistake. Let me set the scene for you. August 2015, Newcastle splashed 15 million quid on this French winger from Marseille. It was meant to be this huge coup because our chief scout Graham Carr had been tracking him for ages. As part of the deal, Remy Cabella went the other way. Everyone was buzzing about it. Thauvin's debut actually looked promising. He got a goal and 3 assists against Northampton Town in the League Cup at St James's Park. We're all thinking, right, we've got a proper player here. Turns out, that was basically his highlight reel for Newcastle. But here's where it gets brilliant, or terrible, depending on how you look at it. Thauvin started showing up to home matches in a tuxedo, a full-on tuxedo. And maybe he thought it was stylish, maybe he thought it showed he was taking things seriously, but Alan Shearer was having absolutely none of it. After watching Newcastle lose 2-1 to Watford, Shearer went on Match of the Day and absolutely tore into him. He turns up in a tux, Shearer said. This is a serious business we're in here. It was funny on the first day of the season, it's not funny anymore. And you know what? Shearer was spot on. We were struggling, heading towards relegation, and here's this lad rocking up, looking like he's off to the Oscars rather than a Premier League match. 4 months. That's all Thauvin lasted on Tyneside. By January 2016, he was on loan back to Marseille. We got relegated that season, despite bringing in Rafa Benitez with 8 games to go. Thauvin, well, it came back. Well, not properly anyway. He was loaned to Marseille again. Then it was made permanent. 16 appearances total for Newcastle, 15 million quid down the drain. But now, years later, Thauvin's finally opened up about what happened. And to be fair to the lad, there's a bit more to the story than just a tuxedo saga. Speaking to a French magazine called So Foot, Thauvin explained that Marseille's president basically told him the club would collapse if they didn't sell him. They needed the money that badly. Newcastle's offer was the only one with enough cash to help Marseille out, so Thauvin felt like he had to sacrifice himself for the good of his club. He admits now that it was a mistake, but he reckons it's easy to say that with hindsight. He's making the point that you can't build a career like that, just taking whatever transfer comes along because your club needs the money. And here's what's interesting. Thauvin's having a bit of a go at how he was used. He said people blamed him for not doing anything at Newcastle, but he reckons you've got to look at the circumstances. It wasn't just about adapting to English football or the Premier League style. The team wasn't playing in a way that suited him, and sometimes they even stuck him up front as a number 9, which clearly wasn't his game. Thauvin also revealed that Rafa Benitez actually wanted to keep him. He did a month and a half of pre-season training under Rafa, and the Spanish manager was keen for him to stay. But at that point, Thauvin had the choice between going to Lazio to work with Marcelo Bielsa or returning to Marseille. There was this whole comedy of errors where Bielsa kept telling Thauvin he wouldn't go to Lazio unless Thauvin signed, and Thauvin was telling Bielsa he wouldn't go unless Bielsa was already there. In the end, neither of them went to Rome, and Thauvin ended up back at Marseille. Plot twist though, after leaving Newcastle, Thauvin actually became a proper player. He hit double figures for goals and assists 2 seasons running, which earned him a spot in France's 2018 World Cup winning squad. Imagine that, a Newcastle flop becoming a World Cup winner. He banged in 16 goals the following season before injuries derailed things a bit. After Marseille, he went to Mexico, then Italy, and now he's back in France with Lens. So the lad's had a decent career despite the Newcastle disaster. Looking back, it's one of those transfers that just didn't work for anyone. Newcastle wasted 15 million quid, Thauvin's development got disrupted, and we ended up getting relegated. But at least now we know there was more to it than just a French winger who liked fancy clothes.
Scott McTominay, the marquee signing that could change everything. Right, here we go then. Story number 3, and this is the big one. Scott McTominay. Remember that name, because this could be an absolute game changer for Newcastle United. Eddie Howe has been an admirer of McTominay since his early days at St James's Park, and now we're seeing exactly why. After leaving Manchester United for 25.7 million quid, McTominay's been absolutely tearing it up at Napoli, won the Serie A title, scored goals for fun, and, get this, he's been nominated for the Ballon d'Or. That's the award for the best player in the world. Scott McTominay from Lancaster is in that conversation now. And if you saw his goal against Denmark in Scotland's World Cup qualifier, that spectacular overhead kick, you'll understand why people are calling him a world beater these days. One of the best goals ever witnessed at Hampden Park, they're saying. The lad's gone from being a squad player at United to being absolutely unplayable in Serie A. Manchester United must be kicking themselves. 25 million quid for a player who's now worth double that, at minimum. Napoli got themselves an absolute bargain, and they're back in the title race again this season, partly because of him. But here's where it gets interesting for Newcastle. There are rumours floating about that McTominay is starting to think about a return to British shores. Now, when Chronicle Live reached out to his camp during the international break to ask about these rumours, they got complete silence. Not denial, not a confirmation, just silence. Which, if you read between the lines, suggests he might not be ready to leave Italy just yet. He's under contract at Napoli until 2028, and apparently he's getting mobbed everywhere he goes in Naples because they're absolutely football mad over there. Can you imagine being a Scottish lad trying to do your shopping in Naples when you've just won them the league? Must be mental. But here's the thing. If Newcastle wanted to make this happen, it would cost about 50 million quid. Double what Napoli paid, basically. But think about it. 50 million for a proven Premier League and Serie A winner, a Scotland international who's going to the World Cup, a player who's been nominated for the Ballon d'Or, and someone Eddie Howe has wanted for years. That's not a bad deal at all, is it? And crucially, this is important, his wage demands would fit into Newcastle's budget. That's massive because we all know FFP is breathing down our necks constantly.
Now, the talk behind the scenes at Newcastle is that they're focusing on signing younger players with sell-on value. That makes sense from a business perspective. But McTominay's only 28. He'd give you 5 or 6 years of top-level football, and he'd bring something that money can't always buy: experience, leadership, goals from midfield, and that winning mentality. Think about this. McTominay would cost about half what we'd have to pay to get Elliot Anderson back from Nottingham Forest. And Ross Wilson, our sporting director, who's Scottish himself, knows exactly what McTominay could bring to this team. The bookies certainly think it's possible. Betfair have Newcastle as 5-1 favourites to sign him. That's ahead of Chelsea at 15-1, Juventus at 17-1, Arsenal at 18-1, and Man City at 20-1. There's even talk of a shock return to Old Trafford at 25-1, or a move to Real Madrid at 33-1. James Mackey from Betfair said that Newcastle have emerged as frontrunners, despite McTominay lifting the Serie A title last season. That tells you something about how seriously people are taking these rumours. Can you imagine if Eddie Howe actually pulled this off? Picture Scott McTominay lining up alongside Sandro Tonali and Bruno Guimaraes in midfield. That would be one of the best midfield trios in the entire Premier League. The energy, the quality, the goals, it would be absolutely incredible. McTominay's not just a destroyer in midfield either. He chips in with goals regularly. That overhead kick against Denmark was special, but he's been doing it week in, week out in Serie A. Having someone who can arrive late in the box, score headers, and dominate physically would give Newcastle a completely different dimension. And the timing could work out perfectly. He's heading to the World Cup with Scotland, which means the whole planet will be watching him perform on the biggest stage. If he has a good tournament, and let's be honest, he probably will, his value's only going to go up even more. Eddie Howe would absolutely love to sign him. You can just tell. These are the types of players Newcastle need if they want to properly compete for Champions League places year after year. Proven winners who've done it in multiple leagues and at international level. The stock's rising, the interest is real, and after that performance against Denmark, McTominay is going to be on everyone's radar. But Newcastle have favourites. That's what the smart money is saying, and if the club can make it happen, if they can bring Scott McTominay to St James's Park, that would be a statement signing that tells everyone Newcastle mean business. Imagine the scenes when he walks out of St James's Park for the first time. The Scottish contingent in our squad would go mad, the fans would be buzzing, and Eddie Howe would finally have the marquee midfielder he's been dreaming about since he arrived. Will it happen? Who knows? But the fact that we're even having this conversation shows how far Newcastle have come. A few years ago, we couldn't attract players like McTominay. Now we're bookies' favourites to sign Ballon d'Or nominees who've won Serie A. That's proper progress, that is. So there you have it, 3 massive stories from the world of Newcastle United. Harvey Barnes keeping his options open for Scotland, Florian Thauvin finally admitting his Newcastle move was a disaster, and the big one, Scott McTominay potentially heading to St James's Park in what could be one of the signings of the year. That third story about McTominay is the one that should have you buzzing. 50 million quid might sound like a lot, but for a player of that quality, in their prime, who fits Eddie Howe's system perfectly, that's the kind of signing that takes you from being a good team to being a great one. Make sure you subscribe because we'll be bringing you updates on all of these stories as they develop. Hit that like button if you enjoyed the video, drop a comment letting me know which story you found most interesting, and I'll see you in the next one. Away the lads.